What's going on, everybody? Khalipa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be going over why you don't want the Cricket Icon Plus. Now, I'm going to be real here. I feel like in the grand scheme of things, none of these are really that much of a concern, and I'm really just making this video for the vibes at this point. Because in general, if you're looking for a really entry-level phone like this that you can get for $99.99 full price, that you're probably not actually going to be paying for this phone anyway, because as of the recording of this video, it's free. In this kind of situation, you can really only expect so much, and I feel like for what most people are paying for it, the Cricket Icon Plus honestly kind of over delivers here. But maybe you're in a situation where you haven't gotten a phone for a really long time and you're trying to decide between this phone and a much higher end device. This video might help give you an idea of what you can expect at this level and kind of what drawbacks you might be looking for. But again, keep in mind, just take everything I say in this video with a grain of salt, because at the end of the day, the stuff I'm going over is really nitpicky, and in general, especially compared to other similar devices, it's really just not that bad. But with that being said, let's get into it. So the first reason why you absolutely do not want the Cricket Icon Plus is the internal storage. Now, with this phone, we're getting 64 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and while that might not sound too bad, especially if you're coming from a similar but older phone, I feel like the Cricket Icon phones in the past have had like 32 gigabytes, so that's really nothing at this point in 2025. In this day and age, speaking of being in 2025, in fact, for that matter, late 2025, at this point, 64 gigabytes is really not a ton. I mean, if you are a bit more of a heavy user, then things are going to add up pretty quickly. So if you do have a lot of apps and games, maybe you're like me and I have a TCL tablet that has 32 gigabytes and it can't even hold all the streaming apps I have. I have like HBO Max, Amazon Prime, AMC Plus, Shudder, pretty much every streaming platform you can think of, and my TCL tablet can't actually hold all of it. I had to delete some. So if you are in that kind of situation, granted, 32 and 64, there is definitely a huge difference between those. I mean, it's literally doubled the space. Just keep in mind, if you are a bit more of a power user and you have more apps, then it will possibly be an issue. Now, aside from that, it does have microSD card expansion, which it's not necessarily rare at this point, but with newer phones, I have noticed that a lot of even more budget phones are starting to do away with microSD card expansion, which is really too bad. But if that is more of an important thing for you, if you have, say, lots of photos and videos, maybe you're someone who keeps music or something like that on your phone, then going from a phone that has microSD card expansion, especially if you already have a big collection of files, to not having it and having to rely on only internal storage, that would be a huge drawback. But luckily with this phone, again, the Cricket Icon Plus does have microSD card expansion, so you won't have to worry about that. Now, the second drawback here for the Cricket Icon Plus is it can be kind of slow during heavy use. Now, this is kind of ironic because in other videos I do talk about how, for what it is, the processor with this phone is pretty good. Now, in case you don't know what we're working with here, the Cricket Icon Plus does have 4 gigabytes of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 6100 Plus processor. So overall, not the most fancy high-end processor out there. If you are doing more demanding activities, then it will be pretty slow, and that's really the main point here. I have been testing a few different things on this phone, and when you're doing stuff like graphics heavy mobile gaming or simply just multitasking a lot, remember we are only getting 4 gigabytes of RAM here, so that is kind of limiting depending on what you're doing. It does start to freeze up and get a little bit slow, but if you're really just using it as a phone and going on social media, I know a lot of us just like to scroll through TikTok for a little while. If that's really all you're doing on this phone, then you will be perfectly fine. But if you are a bit more of a mobile gamer and you like to do stuff like that, maybe you use, like for me on my iPhone, I use photo and video generators a lot. I'm doing stuff with like videos, pictures, all this random stuff, and I really doubt this phone will be able to handle even half of that. Again, back to the main point I made at the beginning of this video, if you are doing stuff that requires a higher end device, maybe you have an older flagship phone like a Samsung Galaxy S9, for example, that's honestly, for a phone, pretty old, but at the same time, it was a really high-end device when it came out. In that kind of situation, just keep in mind, although technology has advanced, and honestly this phone probably has more features than a lot of old flagship phones had back in the day, it's still not going to be anywhere near that when it comes to raw processing power, so just be realistic when it comes to your expectations here. Now, to give you an idea of what this phone can do, I did run a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the scores I got. So with a single core score of 733 and a multi-core score of 1878, that might not really mean a whole lot without anything to compare it to, but I will say throughout the time I've been doing this, I've seen a lot of Geekbench 6 benchmarked scores. But in this kind of entry-level range, I would say these scores are pretty good. But I do recommend running this test on your current device and then comparing your scores to those scores just to give you an idea of whether or not this phone will be a performance upgrade for you, because if you, of course, have something faster, then going from that phone to this phone, especially if you're doing more demanding activities and you're just on your phone all the time, you will see a difference, and not in a good way. But again, I feel like for what you can realistically expect from a phone like this, the performance is still pretty decent. The next reason why you might not want the Cricket Icon Plus is it's pretty featureless. Now, when I say this, I'm really comparing it to stuff like Samsung's and Motorola's that have a lot more customizability. So if you want to do something like customize your home screen, for example, if we go to the home screen kind of menu here, you can't really do a whole lot. Sure, you can change your wallpaper and add widgets, but if we go to home settings, this is pretty much what we got, whereas with Samsung's and a lot of Motorola's, you can change the grid layout, you can hide apps, you can do a lot of other stuff with it. So if you are someone who likes to have a lot of fun, even just interesting features, and some of them can be quite useful depending on what exactly you're doing, in that kind of situation, you might get bored with this phone. Now, for me personally, I'm really just about practicality, so I wouldn't necessarily care that much, and I feel like a lot of you might not either. But again, if you are someone who wants a phone that can do more interesting things, especially considering at this point in 2025, I mean, there's a lot that phones can do, especially even with built-in features. So if that is you, you will probably be disappointed here, but in general, I feel like it's at least okay. Now, the next reason why you might not want the Cricket Icon Plus is if you're someone who wants the latest version of Android as it comes out, or even at all. Keep in mind, on one hand, this phone does have Android 15, which is pretty good. But with a phone like this, if you've never had one before, keep in mind, usually these really entry-level phones are not going to have much software support. In that case, I would go with a Samsung and even some Motorola's, although they're not the best with software support either. But if you do want major updates, like you want Android 16, for example, I'm almost 100% sure that's not going to happen with this phone. Now, I've definitely been wrong in the past. I'm not the greatest at guessing that kind of thing, but really if you're expecting major updates, especially on a consistent basis, and you want them fairly early, then this is not going to be the phone for you. Now, don't get me wrong, there are like security patches and stuff like that, so it's not like the phone's going to be super obsolete in like a couple months, but at least just know what you're getting here. With an entry-level device, under most circumstances, the updates are not going to be the best. Now, the next reason why you might not want the Cricket Icon Plus is we're only getting a 720p display here. Now, like pretty much everything on this list, this is definitely going to depend on how you're actually using the phone, but just know that with this device, despite getting a 6.9-inch display with I think a 20.5:9 aspect ratio, so really tall, narrow form factor, so if you're watching videos in landscape mode, things are going to be super cinematic, and then if you're doing something like reading, you'll be able to fit a ton on the screen with this kind of tall form factor. And of course, a 6.9-inch display is huge. So there is that too. Things are going to be easy to see, all that. But that being said, we are again only getting 720p here, which I honestly don't really mind it. It does look okay to me. And a lot of platforms like social media stuff like Instagram, for example, they're not going to compress things down to 720p, but if you are expecting like an 8K super high-end DSLR photo to show up in perfect condition on something like Instagram. I mean, that's just not how those platforms work anyway. But if you are looking for a really nice experience, you want this super sharp image, really bright colors and stuff like that, then you are gonna be disappointed here because again, we are getting 720p with a PPI of 260. So yeah, despite being a large display that's at least decent for passively like watching videos that you might not be paying a ton of attention to or something like that, then it'll get the job done for that kind of basic use. But yeah, if you're really on your phone all the time, then you might want to consider something a bit higher end that has a better display. Now, the next reason why you might not want the Cricut Icon Plus is the charging. Now, on one hand, this phone does have a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, which it is a really big battery and it has great battery life. I mean, I don't think I've actually even charged this phone since I took it out of the box, and it has 69% battery right now, so really not bad. But at the same time, maybe you're in a situation where maybe you're traveling a lot for work or whatever you're doing and you're not always around a charger, then in that case, keep in mind you're probably going to be disappointed, especially if you already have like a 40-watt giant charging block or something. Yeah, it's not really the best. We're getting, couldn't even find the actual information, but we're getting, I'm guessing, around 10-watt charging here, and there's also no wireless charging, which, I mean, you can't really be surprised with a phone like this, but at the same time, the Cricut Dream 5G, which is a long distant predecessor to this phone, that phone did actually have wireless charging, which is pretty cool, but they did take that feature away. So if you're maybe coming from a Cricut Dream 5G, then unfortunately, when it comes to that specific feature, that's going to be a bit of a downgrade. But honestly, I mean, there are lots of better options out there if you're specifically looking for charging. But again, the battery on this phone does have really good life. It is a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, so it is what it is. And then finally, the last reason why you might not want the Cricut Icon Plus is the design. And I guess I can lump the design and materials into one because it does have a really basic design. It just looks like a generic cheap Android phone, which, I mean, I didn't really expect anything else considering in the past 4 years, Cricut Icon phones have looked almost identical to each other, except I feel like they do get a bit larger every year, but aside from that, it's pretty much the same kind of thing. But yeah, if you are looking for something that's aesthetically maybe a bit more interesting, you might be disappointed here. But I feel like in this price range, you're really just getting something for practicality, something that gets the job done for daily activities, and you're probably not looking for something that looks super interesting or unique. But honestly, I feel like even the Cricut Outlast 5G looks a lot better than this one, and that's basically around the same price as this. I haven't actually used that phone yet, but I do think it looks pretty nice. It's actually in a box on a shelf. So yeah, I actually just wanted to show you this real quick just to prove my point. This right here is the Cricut Outlast 5G. The battery is actually dead in this one, but I feel like it looks a lot nicer, a little bit more premium, and it has a bit more weight to it. So in general, if you are looking for something, maybe you just care about aesthetics a bit more, then the Cricut Icon Plus might be a bit bland for you. And the other thing I feel like makes a bit more of a tangible difference here is the materials don't feel very high quality. And the reason this matters is the screen probably scratches a bit easier than your average device, and then it is really plasticky and it doesn't feel like a super high quality plastic either. In the past, with some of the mid-range Samsung phones, for example, there's plastic that feels almost like not necessarily aluminum or metal, but like not plastic. And then they have like glass backs or maybe like glass sticks, so not necessarily actually glass, but kind of close to that. But yeah, this phone has nothing like that. It just feels like a cheap, really low-end device. So if you are going to be in a situation where maybe you're more prone to dropping your phone, maybe you're working outside a lot and you have your phone out a lot, you have to set it on things, whatever the case may be, if you are in that kind of situation where your phone is more exposed to the elements, definitely get a phone case. I mean, I feel like if you drop this, it's not going to go over very well. And a screen protector too, because while the screen feels decent, it's probably not going to be nearly as durable as a higher end device. So definitely at least be prepared for that. But those were my reasons why you might not want the Cricut Icon Plus. In general, for those of you who are considering a device like this, the drawbacks, while being valid if you're considering either a phone like this or maybe spending a bit more and getting a higher end device, in that case, it is stuff to consider. But if you are really just looking for an entry-level basic Android phone, then these drawbacks, while still being something, just really don't matter a whole lot. Now, if you want to learn more about this device, be sure to check out the other videos I have about it on my channel because I do have quite a few. But that's really it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. And as always, I will see you in the next one.